I'm a hunter. But not in the traditional sense. What exactly is a cryptid? That's the question I ask myself every day. I'm a hunter, but not in the traditional sense. As you can probably guess, I hunt cryptids. Usually, if people hear the term cryptid, they think of Bigfoot or Nessie, maybe even the Yeti. So basically of unlikely myths that don't even make sense. It's been proven multiple times that there isn't even a surviving plesiosaur in Loch Ness, for example. Meanwhile, I have to deal with actual terrors that aren't even close to these myths. I take on a giant humanoid ape with bare fists any day, if that would mean I wouldn't have to face these horrific creatures ever again. But someone has to deal with them, for humanity's sake. Of course, I'm not the only crypt stalker, which is the name the overseers refer to us with. I can't actually give away any more information about us because it would endanger our whole operation, as well as myself. So why am I writing this? I honestly don't really know. I guess I just wanted to get my last encounter off my chest. Anyway, here goes nothing. My target was a still unknown cryptid. These are the ones whose presence has been discovered, but who have never actually been analyzed or exactly located. There have been numerous cases of a predatory creature feasting on cattle in the northeastern part of New Zealand's Northern Island. Carcasses of animals have been found with bite wounds of previously unseen dimensions, with some sheep even having been cleanly bitten in half, and full cow bellies having been ripped out in a single bite. The locals have been referring to it as New Island's chupacabra, with some even suspecting the creature to be some kind of massive surviving descendant of the Haast eagle. The area of its attacks was a mixture of a couple small forests and farmland, so I had plenty of land to cover. Fortunately, the cryptid had left a very distinguishable trail of killings within the aforementioned area, meaning it was territorial, but would move around and not have a set resting place like a burrow or a cave. I was staying at a cabin near the supposed next targeted farm. The owner was also the one that had first spotted the creature. He showed me the dead remains of some of his cattle. Truly a disgusting and unbelievable sight. The bite wound showed signs of large canine-like teeth, but also impressions of teeth or claws extruding outwards from the jaw. The remains of the cow had also been sliced open by some kind of claws, possibly the size of chef's knives. Good thing I brought almost a small armory with me. As dawn was breaking, I headed to a nearby hunting tower that was overlooking the farm. I had already set up my sniper rifle and enough ammunition for an entire battalion of soldiers there earlier. Other than that, I had armed myself with an M16, a Beretta 92, and my trusty bayonet knife, in case it came to close-range combat. Underneath, I was wearing an anti-stab vest. I wasn't sure how much it would protect me from claws, but better safe than sorry. Even though I was as nervous as always, still hadn't gotten over that. Staying awake wasn't easy. I had to fight against my eyelids falling down for hours. I was startled awake by a horrifying growl and almost fell off my chair. Shoot, I actually did fall asleep. I sat up and looked through the scope of my sniper rifle at the farmland where the cattle were sleeping. Nothing unusual had happened. For a while, I almost thought I had imagined the growl from before. That's when I heard it again, this time much closer and so much more intense that I felt dizzy and almost blacked out. When it was gone, I looked through the scope again. That's when I felt the wind sizzling against the left side of my face and saw some kind of creature snatching away a cow with such an unnatural speed that I didn't even get a look at it. There was just a black arrow darting across my field of view, and then the cow was gone. I frantically looked around for the creature but couldn't see anything move. Out of nowhere, the roof of the wooden tower broke in, and the only thing I saw was a cow crashing through the whole tower. I narrowly avoided it, but the impact of subsequent damage made the tower collapse. In the heat of the moment, I instinctively grabbed my M16 and jumped out of the collapsing tower, but the night was pitch black, so I misjudged the distance to the ground and wasn't able to absorb the impact. A painful sting erupted in my left foot, and I had to suppress an agonizing scream. I looked down at my left foot, which had been twisted far more than I thought possible with blood all over it. On my adrenaline high, I managed to crawl behind some of the wooden scraps and inspected the wounds. I had dislocated my ankle, and my whole leg was bleeding from small scraped wounds. With my knife, I cut a piece of my shirt off, put it in my mouth, and painfully set my foot back in place. That's when I saw it. A giant beast landed right behind the scraps, unleashing a shockwave onto the ground around me. I peeked around the corner but couldn't comprehend what I saw. I'll still try to explain it. It was about 3 meters tall, probably more if it had fully stood upright. It had 2 giant bat-like wings with a wingspan of what I estimated to be about 4 to 5 meters. Its skin was covered in large moving scales, and its tail was about 3 meters long with a huge spike the size of a sword. The most haunting part of the body, though, was its head. It was massive. I couldn't believe that it was supported by the creature's body. It had large eyes the size of tennis balls, and there was a colossal set of teeth protruding almost sideways from its mouth. They were drenched in blood, and now I realize how it was possible to maul the cows so terribly. I was snapped out of my blinding trance when its eyes suddenly flicked around and looked me directly in the eyes. Its horrifying Medusa stare ran a shiver down my spine as I froze up in terror. It felt like it was burning its way through my eyes into my brain. I had hunted dangerous cryptids before, but none seemed as hellishly precise and smart as this unholy creature was. Luckily, I snapped out of it as it jumped at me, and I was able to narrowly avoid it. Its speed surprised me, but as fast as I could, I raised my M16 and just shot at any movement I could see. After a couple of seconds, it vanished from my field of view. I tried to run towards a small patch of forest where I would have had a better chance of surviving than in a plain open field, but immediately collapsed in pain. My foot was in worse shape than I had thought. I tried to pull myself towards my rifle when large, bird-like feet landed on it and completely crushed it under its weight. My life flashed before my eyes as it opened its mouth, revealing multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth, and let out a nightmarish growl of victory. In an adrenaline-fueled reflex, I pulled out my Beretta and unloaded the whole magazine deep into its bloody, incomprehensible maw. It made a horrible, disgusting, painful sound, and I pulled out my knife and blindly hacked away at its throat until I was certain that it had stopped moving. I fell over in exhaustion next to the decapitated corpse of the creature and took the first breath in what felt like minutes. I dragged myself towards the collapsed tower and rested my body against the broken remains. But when I turned my head to the side, I spotted a small black box on a part of the roof. I picked it up and squinted my eyes. It was an infrared sensor. What? That's when I heard a car engine starting in the distance and subsequently fading away. I made it back to the cabin after hours of dragging myself through grass and dirt and some failed attempts at walking. Unsurprisingly, it was completely empty and abandoned. It had been locked, so I sat on the porch and bandaged my wounds with pieces of my shirt, while triggering a signal on a chip to call for evacuation. I'm writing this into an empty notebook I found on here. A lot of pages have been ripped out, but there are still a couple left. And now I'm just waiting for the organization's rescue helicopter to pick me up. I'm not a conspiracy nut. I don't believe the moon landing was fake or that there's a secret world government run by lizards. I'm a sane, rational human being. With that said, I'm convinced my neighbor's building some sort of nest. I'm not joking. Let me explain. I got divorced about a year ago and had to move to a new place on short notice. Got a pretty decent 2-room apartment on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building. The place was probably built in the 50s, but I couldn't get a cleaner or cheaper apartment that isn't out of my price range. I moved in and tried to pick up the pieces of my life. At least my husband took all the heavy and expensive boxes in the divorce settlement. I only saw my neighbors in passing. There are 2 apartments per floor, and 5 floors in total. I live on the 3rd floor, and straight across from me is a retired elderly woman. She lives with 2 cats and has a younger man visiting about once a week. It's probably her son. The 2 apartments below me aren't that interesting. A childless couple, and straight across from them, 3 college students. No big deal. The apartment straight above me was probably the most important one. That's the one you gotta look out for when moving to a new place. If anything is gonna disturb you, that'll be the one. You don't want them to be clog dancing enthusiasts, manic cleaners, or the kind of idiot who listens to music with loudspeakers on the bus. The guy who lived above me, Hugo, was an ideal neighbor. He was some kind of accountant who worked at the sanitation department. He kept to himself, never moved a single piece of furniture, and didn't move around that much. No slamming doors, no running. He was pretty big, body-wise, with a sizable pair of glasses and thinning hairline. He lived alone, seemed friendly, and he was simply the best neighbor I've ever had. God bless that silent, chunky angel. So let's talk about the nesting. It started a few months ago in December. It was at the height of the 2020 pandemic, so I was trying to get some minor Christmas shopping done in the off hours of the day. I have flexible work hours, and I came home from work so I can go out whenever I need to. I was getting a photo printed for my mom and was trying to find a fitting frame. I found the small store with a going out of business sale, and I noticed Hugo browsing around silverware further in. Only he wasn't alone. Gosh, I'm having a hard time describing this woman. She was half his weight, an entire head taller. She wasn't even wearing heels. Neck like a swan, thin shoulders, and gorgeous nutmeg hair. She had a peculiar smell, like a mix of bittersweet flower and honey. Pale, flawless skin. Red nails. I just kept staring at her. Hugo told her something funny, and her laugh seemed to light up the entire room. She grabbed his arm, kissed his cheek, and whispered something back to him. He smiled. I'd never seen him smile before. I saw them buy plates, silverware, and a few blankets, nothing special. She paid for the whole thing and carried it all out in a tote bag. Hugo just hung on to her every word, and they both seemed so genuinely caring for each other. It didn't make sense to me. They were basically different species of people. Over the coming days, I noticed some changes. I could sometimes hear laughter coming from the stairwell, and I could hear furniture being moved around during the day. Hugo got himself a new car, one of those large 6-seaters. They were drilling and hammering a few times a week, and on 2 occasions I noticed Hugo and his girlfriend carrying large carpets up the stairs. He seemed so happy. I don't want to sound like a stalker, but I was curious about the 2 of them. I'd noticed they changed the names on the door. That's how I learned her name. Sandra. After going through a painful divorce, I'll be the first to admit I was jealous. Sandra was gorgeous, and it didn't make sense for her to be with a guy like Hugo. I was spending weeks on end in lockdown alone, hearing laughter coming through the ceiling. Yeah, it made me bitter. Sue me. And then her family moved in. Hugo helped carry a lot of heavy boxes up those stairs, and I caught a glimpse of the whole crew through my back window. Sandra had 2 younger sisters, both just old enough to start high school. Then there was her dad, who looked to be in his early 60s. The whole lot of them were beautiful. Everyone smiling, eager to help. Healthy, happy, well-dressed. You could fall in love with any of them with just a picture. It was weird for so many of them to move into such a small apartment. But I'd seen stranger things. I figured it was a temporary thing, but I changed my mind once I saw the moving vans. Yes, that's vans, plural. 3 vans full of boxes, not a single piece of furniture. Hugo looked exhausted carrying those heavy boxes up and down several flights of stairs. Sandra didn't seem bothered at all. I know, looking at them like that was creepy. I was painfully single and most of all, bored. As December turned to January, the whole family had been settled in quite well. They were still decent neighbors. The hammering and drilling stopped early on, and at most I would just hear them laughing at something or watching TV. Hugo would leave for work every day, and he'd always leave with a smile. He lost a lot of weight, and he'd gotten himself both contact lenses and fitting clothes. He looked good. Not compared to Sandra, but still, he was getting there. I ran into him in the stairwell once when I was throwing out some trash. He was just coming back from a jog, chugging some kind of sports drink. He was in better shape than I was. He smiled at me. "Hey, you're in 3B, right?" he asked. "Sure am. And you're 4B. "That's right," he smiled. "Look, if we ever get a bit too noisy, let me know, all right?" "Sure," I nodded. "It's fine, really, no bother. You guys holding out okay?" Yeah, great actually. My fiance got the bug early, so she's got the antibodies. The rest of us just gotta wait for the needle." No doubt, no doubt. We smiled at one another and went our separate ways. Just a few steps later, I had to stop myself. I was too curious. "Hey, I gotta ask, how do you guys all live together in that small space? Doesn't it get crowded?" "Always room for family." Hugo smiled and finished his drink. "No room too small, no problem too big." That was the last time I saw him. I stopped seeing him go to work. His car stayed put in the parking lot all day. I'd see Sandra around town alone. Her sisters as well. I noticed her dad throwing out some trash every now and then, but that was it. Hugo just wasn't around anymore. I didn't think too hard about it at first, but in early March, I realized I hadn't seen him in over a month. His name was still on their door, though. Him and Sandra. This is when I started to get a bad vibe. I started to make a habit out of taking notes of things that seemed weird or out of place with Sandra and her family. Like their trash bags. They're not just trash bags. They're this big blue mesh-type bags that are heat-sealed at the top. Looks like something you'd use to throw away biohazardous waste from a hospital or something. They were round and packed to the brim like beach balls. Then there were the nightly excursions. Once the sun started to set, all of the sisters would take Hugo's car and go for a ride. They'd only be gone a few hours, but they did it consistently for at least 4 days every week, mostly on the weekends. But the weirdest thing started in mid-March. For some time, their dad had been throwing out more trash than usual, sometimes several times a day. And at night, I'd hear these weird noises. It sounded like a mix of an engine and a nature documentary. This slow, constant droning noise. I tried recording it in the bathroom where the sound was the clearest, but it doesn't sound like much. I'd hear that noise at least once a day, sometimes for an hour or two. It wasn't loud, but it was such an unusual sound, you just can't help but to listen. Things escalated gradually. Sometimes I'd watch them come back from their drive with duffel bags full of something. At one point, they just had armfuls of branches and firewood. I made notes of it all, complete with time and date. I was a bit obsessed. I even got out in the middle of the night to check one of their big blue trash bags. I poked one open and felt this intense dirt smell. The bag was just full of some kind of white ceramic and broken glass. I took a piece of the white stuff back home just to get a closer look. At this point, I still thought they were just weird people who'd done something to Hugo. I was still trying to piece it all together. That's the literal thought that made me realize this was something else entirely. To piece something together. I gathered the rest of the white ceramics from the bag and pieced it together. Super glue. An egg. An actual egg. Large as a football. This was the remaining shell. I didn't know what to think. I just hid it. All of a sudden, I started seeing the family in a whole new light. Branches, boxes, bags full of something smelling of dirt. In my notebook, I just made a single entry. They're nesting. At this point, it was the beginning of April, and my job was opening up to having people coming back into work. We were forced to come in at least twice a week to note our hours and report to our supervisor. I didn't mind getting out of the apartment for a while, even if I did have to wear a mask and keep a lot of distance. It was fine. Once, when I was coming home, I noticed my front door open. The old lady across from me was standing in the hallway, holding one of her cats. Something was going on, and the neighbors were antsy. Just as I was about to enter, Sandra stepped out of my apartment. She fixed her brilliant smile on me. "We heard noises," she said. The door was open and your fire alarm was going crazy. Is there... It's fine, she said. The super opened it up to see if there was a fire. I walked up to her and she stepped aside. I gave her a long, questioning look. Fire alarms don't just start by themselves, I said. Where's the super? He got a call, said the lady across the hall. He looked upset. He did, nodded Sandra. Sounded serious. I'm sorry if you were all worried, I said. But please respect my privacy. You can't just go in. I was just waiting for the super to get back. He forgot to lock your door. Well, now I'm here, and I can lock it just fine, thank you. I closed the door, locked it, and looked over my apartment. My notes were gone. The eggshells were gone. My computer had a hard drive malfunction, and there were screws missing from the chassis. Now they knew. The sisters started noticing me more and more. They waved at me every time they took their nightly drive. Their dad gave me a cold look every time he threw out the trash, now in a regular non-blue bag. The sounds at night stopped, and I never saw them carrying anything inside. I was sure they just switched up their schedule, but I wasn't sure. I'd run into them more frequently in person. They'd accidentally meet me in the stairwell every time I went outside. Sandra was always polite, but that smile was hiding something. I felt it. Then there was water damage in the ceiling of my bedroom, something foul smelling. There was something heavy up there, and the ceiling had started to bulge. I called the supervisor about it, but some man kept telling me that I had to have the papers for an insurance claim before they could fix it. It was bullcrap, and they were stalling for time. I think they were trying to cover the fact that the super hadn't been in for at least a month. I'm not stupid. I knew the super didn't have an assistant. Thing is, I hadn't really been paying attention to my other neighbors. The couple downstairs and the college roommates, they moved out a month earlier. I didn't even think about it. Now, I had 8 new neighbors, and they were all very, very pretty. 6 women, 2 men, all in their early 20s and drop-dead gorgeous. The entire apartment complex was full of them now. That weird sound I used to hear seemed to be coming from every direction at night. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They were just carrying in all kinds of weird trash up to their apartments. Branches, firewood, plastic, bag after bag of fertilizer, and planting dirt. Last week, there were more moving vans coming. Everyone was going outside to help our new, beautiful neighbors carry their stuff inside. I felt trapped in my own apartment. I decided, once and for all, I just had to leave. Once I stepped into the stairwell, I noticed 8 of them looking at me from all over. They were on the floors above, below, even straight across. Yeah, seems the old lady with the cats moved out as well. And then they screamed. They all just screamed in unison. They were like animals trying to scare away a predator. I could hear boxes dropping and footsteps approaching. I panicked. I glanced at them and burst into a sprint. They had their mouths open, screaming, feet running, eyes large and dark like cats getting ready to pounce on a mouse. I took the fire escape out of the back, ran, twisted my ankle, and got in my car. I just drove. Something pounded on my back windshield, but I got away. And now I'm here, posting about it. I'm not sure I should look into this. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. I don't think I'm safe yet. I'm staying with my brother, and just the other day he told me there was a beautiful young woman asking for me while I was at the grocery store. YouTube, I don't know what this is or what they're doing. All I know is that they're nesting, and people are going missing. I can't get that noise out of my head. That scream. Those faces. It all started yesterday lunchtime at school while I was waiting for my friend to use the bathroom. I glanced in the set of mirrors above the sinks to see that I had developed a large pimple, smack bang in the middle of my eyebrows. The lighting was artificial, dingy, and very unflattering, but there was no getting around it. The pimple was big. I'm talking big enough to pick up a satellite. Oh, hadn't it been a little bump this morning when I first noticed it at home? Why had I picked at it? I groaned in irritation, moving very close to the mirror so that my nose was practically touching the glass, examining the pimple, tilting my head to scrutinize my reflected face in the light. I am a 15-year-old girl, and it's not exactly unexpected that I would get the occasional pimple or two, but I was very aware that the next day was school picture day. And I wanted so badly to look nice in my photo that I was extremely distressed to see how noticeable the pimple had become. Now, looking back on this moment less than 24 hours ago, the pimple seems like such a trivial issue compared to the one that has arisen as a result. Later that evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and picked at the pimple until the space between my eyebrows was red and irritated. The pimple only appeared bigger. I wish it would look good for one day. Is that really too much to ask? I demanded of my reflection. It stared back at me cluelessly, my angry face framing the angry red spot. I stepped back from the mirror, looking in dissatisfaction and annoyance at the mess I'd made of my face. Trying to make the best of the situation, I ran a hairbrush through my hair and practiced the smile that I would use the next day for my picture. All I saw was the pimple protruding from my face, taunting me smugly from where it was stubbornly seated between my eyebrows. I looked hideous, I thought. In a flash of anger and frustration at myself, I threw the wooden hairbrush I was holding at my bedroom mirror. It shattered down the middle, creating cracks that snaked up the left side of the glass. I looked at what I had done in stunned silence, feeling ashamed of my irrational temper tantrum as I surveyed the broken mirror. How was I going to tell my dad that I smashed it? What a stupid thing to do. It didn't look like any of the glass had fallen out, and most of the right side of the mirror was fine, but I was cursing myself for behaving so idiotically and rashly over something as shallow and insignificant as a pimple. It was late, though, and I was too tired to begin to sort it out then and there. I sighed, turning off the bedroom light and climbing into bed, resolving to offer to pay for a new mirror myself the next day. I didn't lay awake long. My eyes felt like heavy metal shutters, and I drifted almost instantly to sleep. My dreams were fleeting flashes of old fairy tales and stories, dug up from the deepest caverns of my brain that had lay unvisited for years. An incoherent storyboard of a tale that my great-grandmother had once told me as a child, about a vain woman who had smashed a mirror. Vague, fuzzy, and disjointed scenes of the woman and her misfortunes danced behind my eyelids. The remembered sound of my great-grandmother's voice swam to the surface of the dream. "It's very bad luck to smash a mirror, you know." The minute I woke up this morning, I knew something was wrong. The sound of my alarm pulled me from my dream, but it somehow sounded different, as if I was hearing it from far away, or perhaps underwater. I rolled over, pulling the covers over my head more and nestling into my pillow, trying to ignore the alarm, when I felt a sharp pull in my knees and feet. They pulled me against my will, as though attracted to a magnet out of my bed. My feet placed themselves firmly on the carpeted floor of my bedroom and took a couple steps toward the shattered mirror. I was fully awake now, watching in horror as my legs moved on their own. The pulling in my feet stopped, and I stood still. Something felt different. Not only was I being controlled by some magnetic force, but there was something else. I couldn't place my finger on it, but something was definitely wrong about my bedroom. Then it started to sink in. My bed was pressed up against the wall, but on the right side of the room, when it should have been on the left. The window was above the dressing table, but on the wrong side. The whole room had been flipped and was now the wrong way around. I looked towards the mirror to see that the crack that snaked up the left side in the glass had been reversed, so it was now on the right side. In my confusion, I tried to take a step backwards, but my feet were rooted to the floor. Like some invisible force had glued me to the carpet. The more I tried to move, I found that I could not move any part of my body apart from my eyes. I tried to call for my parents, but my mouth wouldn't move. perhaps I was still dreaming and experiencing some kind of sleep paralysis. But no, I felt wide awake now. I finally noticed my reflected self, standing in front of the mirror, separated from me by the cracks in the glass. Standing in my bedroom. My bedroom as I knew it. Everything on the correct sides. It was like I was seeing the room from the other side of... No. That's ridiculous. I looked at my reflection to see that she was wearing the same neutral expression that I could feel my face was glued in. I watched her, willing myself to move, when the lips of my reflection began to curl into a smug sneer, tilting her head slightly to the side. I felt the magnetic pull in my cheeks and neck, forcing me to replicate her movements exactly and simultaneously. It couldn't be. Could I really be inside the mirror, forced to reflect the actions of the person on the other side? My reflected self let out a short laugh, very different from my own. The magnetic force opened my mouth to laugh with her, but no sound came out of mine. I only heard hers, as if from underwater. It rung out with a sinister echoing quality.
How does it feel to be on the other side for a change?
My reflection taunted me in a voice like a bad imitation of mine, which somehow sounded breathy and girly, which mine certainly was not. It spoke with a sneering tone that rung with smugness as she looked me up and down. We moved a few steps closer to the mirror simultaneously. I desperately tried to move my feet, but it was no use. I wanted to run, to go back into bed and wake up in my own room, not this bizarre, horrible imitation. My reflection raised a hand, the magnetic force simultaneously moving my palm to the cool glass so that they were touching. She was totally still for a moment, looking at me coldly, a sneer still playing around the corners of her mouth. Then moved her finger to trace along the crack in the mirror, my finger moving over the sharp, broken glass, our fingertips touching in the process.
This cracked mirror will have to be sealed up,
hissed my mirror self, so quietly it was hardly audible, pouting slightly as she gazed at me, daring me to challenge her. But of course, I could only imitate my grotesque double. I watched her spend 15 minutes getting dressed and putting on makeup, gathering the books that I had laid out on my desk and packing them in my school bag, mechanically replicating every movement on my side of the glass, my mind worrying, hopelessly trying to find a way to get out of this nightmare. When my reflected self was finished in my room, she blew a taunting kiss at me, which I was forced to replicate before turning to leave the room, swinging my bag over my shoulder. There was a few seconds where I couldn't see anything and my vision was dark. Then a brightly lit white room flashed into focus. I was disoriented, but worked out that I was looking at my bathroom from the other side of the mirror. I made out my smug, reflected self through the slightly smeared bathroom mirror, squeezing toothpaste onto my toothbrush and cleaning her teeth, leaning closer to the mirror on her side to spit into the sink. I felt myself copy her movements mechanically. My reflection turned to leave again. The second that her back was to me, I was plunged back into darkness. Total and complete darkness. I immediately realized that I was able to move of my own accord again and begun to spin around, arms flailing to grab the empty blackness. There was nothing. Well, almost nothing. I could see shapeless obsidian figures in the corners of my vision that seemed to glint and shine just outside of my view, but as soon as I turned to see them, they were gone. I could hear snatches of sounds like rushing water and distant voices from very far away. I had no concept of the passing of time. I stumbled aimlessly into the never-ending darkness, changing direction, sometimes fruitlessly running for a time, twice falling on my hands and knees, feeling the smooth surface of the ground. But I couldn't see it. But it felt cold and smooth, like a mirror. More disturbingly still, I saw snatches of my reflection that would flash before my eyes. A blurry shape in a car wing mirror while walking to school, a worm's eye reflection of her from what I can only guess was a puddle, a circular framed image of my reflection laughing at the glass of someone's watch, and so on. When I saw these images, it was like the metallic impulses in my body jumped to attention, obediently moving in perfect replicas of my reflection. But these were just glimpses of the day I should have been living. What I perceived to be a couple of hours of this had passed when I felt my face pulled into a sweet smile. My hands folded in my lap and my knees crossed. I saw my reflected self doing the same through black-tinted glass that swam into vision before my eyes. Oh shoot, I forgot. She was sitting for the school photo. "Say cheese," said a distant echo of a man's voice. "Cheese," said the high, silly, affected voice of my reflection with a syrupy little giggle. Ugh. A couple more hours passed like this, confined to the suffocating darkness. If this hellish situation was truly real, and my reflection was living my life in my world, then surely my family would realize that this sick imitation wasn't truly me. They'd realize it, wouldn't they? But a voice told me that even if they noticed something strange, they would never be able to guess what had truly happened. Am I gonna be stuck here forever? The next time I clearly saw my reflection was later that day, when the image of the artificially lit grubby school bathroom swam into focus. There she was, my malevolent, smiling double staring right at me, standing just where I had stood the previous morning. Could that really have been only 24 hours ago? She was alone, surveying me with an innocent expression. "I got the photographer to show me my school picture. Looked really nice. I'm so glad," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I did the same, wanting with all my being to break the glass and strangle my simpering twin, but unable to move. "Oh, look!" she exclaimed sweetly, moving closer to the glass to examine the pimple between her eyebrows. "My pimple is practically gone." Hey guys, it's Giggles. Thank you so much for watching my video. I just wanted to say if you're interested and want to make a donation, I have a Ko-fi page, and I also have a Spreadshirt where I'm selling merch in the form of t-shirts. Both links are in the description, and I'd really appreciate if you guys check those out. If you enjoyed the story, please show the author some love, leave a like and a comment, subscribe, etc., etc. And also, I would love to know how I can be praying for you, so if you've got a prayer request, big or small, please let me know. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
You awake yet?
I rubbed my eyes, turning my head towards the doorway to see my dad standing in the doorway in his usual blue overalls and white shirt. "Well, I am now," I replied in a groggy and tired voice. "Not late for school, am I?" Without saying a word, he gestured for me to follow him before turning around and heading back down the stairs. Quickly, I got out of bed, knowing from his blank facial expression that my dad was clearly upset. I picked up the pace in an attempt to catch up with my father, who was already out the door. Now at his side, I slowed down my pace to take in the beautiful sunny morning as we walked into the pig pen. When we got to the entrance to the pen, my father stopped walking. I followed suit. He got down on one knee right next to me as to be on my eye level and pointed inside the pen.
Anything seem odd to you?
I was about to reply no when I noticed what he was referring to. There were only 4 pigs inside the pen, when there were usually 5. My heart sank when I remembered that I was the one who closed the pen last night. My father turned his head toward me.
Tell me.
Slowly, I turned to face him, worried that I would be punished for my mistake.
Did you let one of the pigs get out?
"No," I stuttered the reply. "I never make such a mistake." My father continued to stare intently at me with his doubtful eyes, making me more and more nervous each second he held his glance. Finally, he pushed himself up and looked up at the sky, and then back down to me.
We'll talk about this later. You got school to go to.
I breathed a big sigh of relief as he walked by me and back into the house. I'd have some hours of school before whatever punishment awaited me. Before walking back into the house, I turned to the pen in front of me and began to wonder how one of the pigs managed to get out. I could have sworn I locked the gate tight. Oh well, it didn't matter. I went back inside the old wooden house and headed straight for the kitchen. There, my mom was making breakfast in her favorite red apron. She turned her head to me and smiled. "Heard you let one of the pigs out," she said in her deep southern accent. "Yeah," I responded in a disappointed tone. I don't know how I managed to even... My mother raised her hand as a gesture to stop speaking, which I followed. "It's okay," she started. "I know it was an accident. Your father knows that too. He's just a bit cranky for now, that's all." Having been reassured by her, I smiled and thanked my mom. "No problem, baby," she replied in her usual upbeat and happy tone. "Now come on, I made you breakfast." Finishing my breakfast, I changed out of my pajamas I had worn the night before into more presentable attire. After getting all ready, I sat on my bed and started shifting through my backpack in order to make sure I had everything. Homework, folders... Oh yeah, I almost forgot. I got up and went over to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer. I pushed away some clothes to the bottom of the dresser where it sat. Pepper spray? Picked up the pepper spray and stuffed it in my back pocket. There were some rowdy teenagers that liked to scare kids like me while we walked to and from school. I managed to get my hands on some pepper spray without either of my parents knowing, just in case the teenagers ever get more violent. After ensuring that I was all set, I made my way downstairs. "Bye, honey. Have a good day at school," my mom said as I walked out the door. "Thanks, Mom. I'll try." As I closed the door behind me, I walked down the old wooden steps to our porch, each making a creak as I stepped on it. I was about to make my way down the road when I stopped due to a question that had just popped up in my mind. Would pepper spray really be enough to stop them? I asked myself aloud. Sure, it'd be able to stun one of them for a good second, but that would just make them angrier. As I questioned the power of my pepper spray, a new idea popped into my head. Feeling a small smirk come across my face, I turned over to the large cornfield in front of our house. I could easily walk through the corn to hide from any miscreants looking to cause me harm. I thought it was quite clever of me to think of such an idea. I made up my mind. I was going to walk through the field to get to school. Sure, I wouldn't be able to walk the entire way to school through the corn, but I'd surely be able to walk a good distance in it given its large size. I strode into the deep cornfield, pushing away any stalk that stood in my way. After walking for about a minute, I began to find the walk rather calming. It was just me, my own thoughts, and the endless sea of corn. I stopped for a moment to fully bask in the relaxing isolation. I took a deep breath as I stared up at the bright blue sky. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe. My slow breathing stopped. My eyes widened. Did I really just hear something, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I heard it again. No, my mind was not playing tricks on me. There was something else in here. I was horrified. What could possibly be out here with me? Could it be the bullies? Could it be a wild animal? Could it be the pig? Wait, the pig! The thought of the pig being the source of the sound filled me not with dread, but with hope. Hope that I could redeem myself to my father and avoid punishment. I wasn't foolish, though. I knew that it was entirely possible that whatever this thing was, it could be dangerous, and so I cautiously tiptoed over there with my pepper spray in my right hand, just in case. As I got closer to the sound, it became clear that it was eating something. Probably the corn. I soon got even closer and began to hear the swarming of flies. I pushed away the corn stalks as I began to pick up the pace. Sure that I was going to find the lost pig, a large smile formed across my face as I pushed away the last of the corn that blocked my vision. My smile quickly faded. At my feet was the pig, its stomach torn open and its innards spilt out. The flies swarmed over the carcass, eager to lay their eggs in its wounds. The only thing worse than the fate of the hog was what was kneeling over it, eating what remained. A humanoid figure with brown, leathery skin was chewing at the meat left on the pig's bones, causing a crunching sound. I let out a loud gasp, which caused this abomination to look up at me with its deformed face and black, sunken eyes. The monstrosity stopped its face to lunge at me. Thankfully, I was quick enough to spray it in the eyes, making it let out a screech of pain and stop mid-lunge. I used this to my advantage and began to run from it as far as I could. I heard that thing start to run behind me, somehow being able to catch up with me. I could hear its raspy grunts as it slowly came closer, soon sounding like it was right next to me. It swiped, pulling my backpack off instead of clawing me. Afterwards, it soon lost interest in me and stopped its hunt, as soon as I got out of the cornfield. I leapt onto the hard concrete floor, finally away from that beast. I tried to get back up, but my body had used up all of its energy to get me out of the cornfield, and that I had no more to keep running. I rolled over onto my back, my chest pounding, and my lungs racing. I slowly poked my head up to look back at the cornfield. I slowly poked my head up to look back into the cornfield. And there was nothing. There was nothing but an endless sea of corn. I think it's fair to say I'm a moderately sized YouTuber. Horror narrations, mostly. But I dabble in true crime and let's not meet stories from time to time, too. Narrators are strange creatures. We infuse ourselves with the darkest aspects of the internet's imagination. We try to get in the heads of monsters and murderous stalkers, only to turn around and be one of the most supportive online communities ever. You can't throw a severed head around here without hitting one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. It's not to say there isn't competition. There are folks sporting cement shoes down in the Hudson, less saturated than the YouTube horror scene. Barely perceivable differences in audio quality make or break your channel. With that in mind, I decided it was time to upgrade. I bought a sweet new mic. Simply selling my old AT2020 felt a bit underwhelming, and after everything the old mic and I had been through, it needed a proper send-off. I figured I'd have some fun with it and do a giveaway. I announced the contest rules after a video and told listeners to leave a comment with a certain reference. Using an online D82, I rolled for a random winner. The person who messaged me back was over the moon about winning. They were super nice, gave me their mailing information, and I sent my beloved mic off to a good home. The winner remarked it was generous of me to throw in the interface and was more than happy to buy the XLT cable on their own. The wind came out of my sails when my new S214 arrived, but wouldn't connect. No matter what I did, it wasn't getting power. I called it in, and they deemed it a factory defect. The waiting game began anew as I had to mail in the broken mic. There's no way to make content. The steady stream of views I usually enjoyed slowed to a trickle. I could feel the algorithm's favor slipping away with each day. That's why, when the new mic I gave away reappeared on my porch, I couldn't believe my luck. They hid it underneath my regular sock delivery, in exactly the same condition as when I gave it away. With the prodigal mic returned, I set to chipping away at the backlog of stories. Everything was the same except for this strange hum which spoiled a couple of takes. I took off my headset each time to listen, worried there was a breach in my precious sound booth. Nothing. The booth was as tranquil as it always was. Weird noises notwithstanding, I finished recording and started the most exciting part. Editing. The takes ruined by that hum sounded clean, yet others had bizarre artifacts. After each phase of refining the audio, whatever glitch my mic was experiencing would worsen, and frustratingly, move to portions I was sure were perfect. After running noise reduction, bursts of sound, almost syllables, could be heard woven into my script. I repeated the section, hoping that if I heard it enough, I could figure out what it was. If one hears or says the same sound over and over, it loses meaning, and eventually is lost to ear fatigue. But I could still see the aberrations in the waveform. So I tried to fade them out. Nothing worked completely, and I gave in and just threw one story up on the tubes. I had to get something out after all. It's not healthy to constantly monitor your stats. I resist checking for at least a couple of hours after an upload. The bottom dropped out of my stomach when I opened the dashboard to find my subscriber count decimated. I thought surely I had logged into the wrong account. It was more likely a glitch in the app than my losing a massive number of subscribers. Audience interactions skyrocketed. That is to say, dislikes and negative comments poured in. People ranged from uneasy to outright distraught. I'll copy-paste a bit of what they said. Good narration as always, but it's kind of distracting having that other voice talking at the same time. How did you get my mother's voice to say those awful things? She passed away 5 years ago. You're sick. Whoa, creepy. It really sounds like that guy is getting closer to me. I don't know how you know my kid's name, but that is way over the line. Unsubscribed. The common theme among my myriad of comments seemed to be the hearing of loved ones, or a strange man's voice saying messed up things. They claimed to hear it in the background, underneath the actual audio. A narrator friend DM'd me on Twitter and asked who I got to voice the guy in the background. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. Skipping through the problem video, I only heard those bursts from before. I switched the video to private, trying to think of how to go about damage control. Many other narrators and listeners swamped my socials with questions concerning disturbing things they heard. I think I fell asleep fielding an endless stream of questions. All I could do was put my head down and get on to the next story. After work the following day, I forged ahead by painstakingly destroying every audio aberration I could find. I didn't care. I left inelegant cuts in words, preferring pops and crude skips to the phenomena sabotaging my channel. It took far longer than usual, but I winnowed out every one of those awful sounds. I threw together a thumbnail and uploaded the story. The usual first and second comments came in, as well as the obligatory blanket excitement statements. I kept refreshing the dashboard, willing the comments to stay positive. In a few seconds, dislikes shot past likes, and someone commented, WTF. In a fury, I bounded upstairs to watch it on my smart TV. No login there. I would get the same experience as anyone else stumbling across my video. I heard it around a minute into the story. My voice competed with another's. I rewound with the cumbersome TV remote, and sure enough, the man's voice played every time, like I baked it in. There was no way I could have missed something so glaring in the editing. Just like most people who message me, I heard him speak 4 times throughout the story. He said,
"Can you hear me? I can see you. Can you see me? I am so close to you."
I tried to message that narrator friend but got no response. In fact, everyone who messaged about hearing the man just dropped off the face of the earth. What has me in a blind panic is their accounts went inactive at the same time. Not one of them has done anything since midnight this morning. No new posts, comments, or likes from anyone who mentioned hearing the man. I destroyed that mic and burned what was left in the backyard. I'm watching it smolder, letting the minutes slip by. Even outside, I feel the air closing in around me, and an inescapable sense of something closing in. I found Mr. Giggles in a dumpster behind what was once a magic store. I'd always thought ventriloquist dummies were lame, but there was something different about him. The moment he slid onto my arm, I felt this power. It was as though cascading waves of energy were running through my entire body. I felt strong, confident, complete. In the months that followed, ventriloquism became my new obsession. I bought countless books on the subject. This was before you could just look things up on YouTube, and practiced morning, noon, and night. Mr. Giggles and I became inseparable. You can imagine my surprise when he sprang to life one evening. I asked Ben Lawrence to the dance earlier that day. It didn't go well. "But Donna," he replied, "I heard you were already taking someone." "You did?" I asked innocently. "Yeah. Aren't you going with your doll?" His friends erupted with laughter. Later, as I was crying into my pillow, Mr. Giggles spoke. "Are you just gonna sit back and take that from him?" I sat up and wiped my tears away. Mr. Giggles? Did you just talk?" My hand operated him all on its own. "Who does this guy think he's messing with?" he said. "Embarrassing you in front of everybody like that?" His head completed a full rotation. "We gotta get him for this. Nobody talks to my best friend like that. Nobody." What followed was an elaborate scheme to dump 20 pounds of manure on top of Ben at the spring fling dance. Mr. Giggles masterminded it, obviously, and his plane went off without a hitch. It took him 3 weeks to get rid of the smell. From that point on, Mr. Giggles spoke non-stop, insisting we exact revenge for even the slightest indiscretion. And after that, we graduated to petty crimes, theft, graffiti, vandalism. I wanted to stop, but he had his hold on me. Sometimes it felt as though I was the puppet. Even when we were apart, I heard his voice in my head, ordering me how to act. One afternoon, as we were walking home, Miss Wendell's cat lunged at us. "You want to go, furball?" Mr. Giggles shouted. I begged him to stop. Honestly, I did. Miss Wendell's cat was a mean old thing, but that doesn't justify what Mr. Giggles did. And when he put his handiwork on display for the whole neighborhood to see, I knew things had officially gone too far. So, I locked him inside a hamper and stashed it in the attic. The end. Except it wasn't the end. No, not by a long shot. Without Mr. Giggles, I was like a junkie going through withdrawal. My arm felt incomplete. My mood hit such a low, even my absentee parents recognized something was wrong and sent me to a psychologist. I told her everything, even the part about Miss Wendell's cat. She insisted Mr. Giggles was my coping mechanism, and that his actions were really just me acting out. "Think back to those times he took control," she'd say. "Before he did, were you feeling scared or angry or upset?" I paused for a moment. "Well, yeah." "And did it make you feel better seeing Mr. Giggles exact revenge on the people who hurt you?" "It did." She leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. "I think we both know who is really in control." With the therapist's help, I broke free of Mr. Giggles. The urge to wear him subsided slowly, freeing me from his dark influence. In time, his voice quieted, and then disappeared entirely. Decades passed. I grew up, got married, mostly forgot about the whole horrible ordeal. But then one night, my husband and I were arguing in the kitchen. "How could you sit around playing video games for 2 days straight when my mother is dying in the hospital?" he shouted. I sighed in response. We'd been fighting a lot lately. Between me losing my job and his mother's poor health, things had become tense. Our relationship was like a pressure cooker ready to explode. "Do you care about anything that isn't about you?" he asked. Without answering, I stormed into the hall. A moment later, I felt a peculiar pinch at the back of my skull. "You didn't forget about your old pal Mr. Giggles, did ya?" In an almost trance-like state, I made my way towards the attic. There, I pushed aside boxes filled with old clothes until I stumbled upon the familiar hamper. Mr. Giggles was wearing his trademark pinstripe suit and red bow tie. I gulped. My hand trembled as it approached the slot in his back. A tingling sensation danced across my fingertips. Jolts of excitement ran from my palm and down to the soles of my feet. With a heavy sigh, I closed my eyes and slid him onto my arm. The moment I did, his mouth flapped open. "Kill him." I ripped him off. He looked up at me, that self-satisfied grin forever painted on his face. I couldn't keep him around. If I did, some twisted part of my subconscious might have acted out. I loved my husband more than anything. Well, sure, we'd been having our problems lately, but so did every couple. I carried Mr. Giggles downstairs, meaning to rush straight to the dump and be done with him once and for all. But then my husband shouted from within the kitchen, "And where do you think you're going?" My jaw clenched. In the back of my mind, my therapist spoke in a calm voice. "Think back to those times Mr. Giggles took control. Before he did, were you feeling scared or angry or upset?" Perhaps it was best to face my problems head on. Sure, I could get rid of Mr. Giggles, but the underlying issue would still be there. Breathing deeply, I set him aside and entered the kitchen. My husband was standing behind the counter, gritting his teeth. I raised a hand. "I've got something to say." He opened his mouth to protest. 2 minutes! That's all I'm asking for." He sighed. "I know I haven't been very attentive lately, but it's just between losing my job and..." He rolled his eyes. But that's no excuse. I understand that now. First thing tomorrow, I'll start looking for a new one. And I'm putting a stop to the gaming, I swear." He sighed. "Promise?" "Promise." We kissed. "Honey," I said, "I've got some stuff to take to the dump. Want me to pick up anything from the store on the way back?" "No, I think we're fine." As I wandered back to the hall, my husband grabbed an envelope off the counter. Before I could leave the house, he screamed louder than a 747 taking flight. "Why are you spending $5,000 on OnlyFans?" I clutched Mr. Giggles between two quaking hands. "Kill him. He'll never understand you like I do. Kill him! Then it'll be just like old times." At that moment, I realized my therapist was wrong. Mr. Giggles was real, and no amount of new age hippie bullcrap could convince me otherwise. He couldn't be stopped. Not by me. Not by anybody. "Donna, come back here!" My husband called. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pulled Mr. Giggles onto my arm. Once he was in position, his head completed a full rotation. He guided us back to the kitchen, where my husband was red with fury. "What the heck is that thing on your arm?" Ignoring him, Mr. Giggles grabbed a knife off the counter and raised it above his head. For the past weeks, I've been renovating a house, some Victorian fixer-upper in the middle of nowhere that I bought for a steal. It's been uninhabited for decades. The locals wouldn't even touch it with a 10-foot pole, but it's got good bones and a solid structure, even though it's surrounded by swamps. Anyway, while cleaning out the attic, I uncovered a peculiar diary stashed between the cushions of a battered velvet couch. The girl who wrote it must have been munching on shrooms. It's a pretty wild read. I was planning to donate it to the nearest thrift store, but a friend suggested I post it here first, as you guys might get a kick out of it. So here it is, the last few pages of the diary, transcribed in full. It was 3 o'clock on the 1st of October when I smelled it. I woke to the cold hardwood floor poking through my thin mattress, a damp fungal stench slowly penetrating my nostrils. Cursing under my teeth, I rubbed the crumbs of sleep out of my eyes and floundered into the hallway, carefully avoiding the plethora of planks, nails, and tools that were strewn about. Previous tenants had left the house in a state of renovation. Fortunately for us, it made rent affordable. The remoteness of the house most likely also played a part in it. I knocked on my mom's heavy bedroom door. "Do you smell that too?" Smell what? She yawned from the other side of the door. Really? It's an old house, Sadie. You'll get used to it. You always do. The room groaned. Do me a favor and go to bed, will you? What time is it anyway? As I slumped back to my bedroom, another waft of the fungal stench hit me. This time my legs started to feel shaky, and for a moment, I nearly lost control of my body. The smell seemed to emanate from the trapdoor to the attic. It was 2 o'clock on the 3rd of October when I heard it. I was roused from uneasy dreams by the sound of nails scuttling on the other side of the ceiling, where the unexplored attic lay. With sweat purling on my forehead, arm hair standing up, I gripped my blankets and heeded the soft scratching. I was scared and I hated it. I wasn't a little girl anymore. At least that's what I'd been assuring Mom in our latest disputes. Sure felt like one right now. After a particularly loud thump, I collected my courage and jumped out of bed. With rubbery legs, I felt my way to the bedroom door, stopping dead in my tracks with each scuttle coming from the attic. Carefully, I twisted the doorknob and slowly creaked into the hallway, the familiar damp mushroom smell instantly filling up my nostrils. My stomach turned. A heavy silence hung in the air. I took a first step into the dark, disorderly hallway, a light scuffling sound over my head. My legs were liquefying at this point, but I took a hesitant second step, answered by a barrage of footsteps all across the ceiling. A squeal escaped my throat as I blundered back into my room, slammed the door shut, and hid under my blankets. The attic remained quiet for what remained of the night, though I have no recollection of reaching sleep. It was 4 o'clock on the 5th of October when I saw it. I woke to a full bladder begging for relief. The familiar stench of fungus filled the room. I had gotten used to it, but tonight, it was stronger than it had ever been. I clambered out of bed, the cold October air tempting me back down. The brass doorknob felt cool to the touch as I slowly squeaked into the hallway, avoiding waking up Mom. I flicked on the light, and there it hung, out of the trapdoor. A round, hairless head, grinning wildly with sharp, triangular teeth. Pale, mushroom-colored skin. Giant, yellow disc-like eyes staring right at me. I froze for what felt like ages, caught in a dreadful staring contest. My brain begged my legs to run. Please run. My throat attempted to squeeze out a scream. Meanwhile, the fungal stench enveloped me, suffocating. The thing didn't move a muscle, just grinned its big, dumb smile. And then, stiff as a plank, it slowly reeled its head up backwards into the attic. The trapdoor fell shut with a clap, and with it every muscle in my body loosened as I sunk to the floor. The dull light of morning struck my eyes as a warm, familiar hand clasped my shoulder. Sadie, what are you doing here on the floor? Mom? Although we had our difficulties, Mom always had my back. I believe you, Sadie, she said. I believe that you saw something. I'm going to find out what. She rushed into her bedroom, rummaged through a box, and returned with a flashlight. Cautiously, she lifted the trapdoor, the damp fungal stench spilling into the hallway. She heaved and brought a handkerchief to her mouth and clambered up to her shoulders into the attic. I felt ill, unsure whether I had actually seen something or if it had been no more than a realistic nightmare. I wished for the latter. The click of the flashlight, a tense silence fell over the hallway. What in the world? Mom came crashing down, her eyes radiating panic, the flashlight toppling to the ground. Sadie? She slammed the trapdoor shut. I rushed to her help and hung onto its handle with all my weight, trying to keep it shut. Oh, what did she see? Mom picked up her hammer from the floor and frantically started nailing the trapdoor shut. No sign of struggle came from the other side. I let go of the handle and assisted her with the barricade. The familiar stench had been intensifying with it. Our resolve quickly waned, energy drained. Finally, we sunk to the floor, our bodies unwilling to move another muscle. So we lay there all day, slumped between the boards and nails on the hardwood floor, the trapdoor looming above us, nailed shut as tightly as we could manage. Fighting against the drowsiness induced by the fungal odor, we agreed it had even started to smell pleasant. At first, everything remained quiet. Mom started to doubt if she had actually seen anything. Maybe her mind had played tricks on her. Maybe the funny smell had made us hallucinate. After all, hadn't she sounded so absurd? A hairless, naked man on a velvet couch in the far corner of the attic, unmoving, grinning with sharp teeth and large yellow eyes? We laughed until we cried. But the sunlight has begun to fade. And what started as a soft scuttling over our heads is now blown into a raging storm, banging, thumping, and scratching all over the attic. Something wants to get out. My brain screams at my legs to run. Please run, but they won't listen. Mom isn't waking up. As I sit here and write, not knowing whether our barricade is going to hold, I am left only to wonder, what lives in our attic? It was 12 o'clock on the 6th of October when I felt it. All here, all are in the sleeping city. I don't know how I came here, though I guess the arrival matters not. All that is important is me, alone in this sleeping city. I walk alone on these empty streets. There are many malfunctioning lights, yet I can still find my way. I might be for way longer than I've already been, but I'm not sure if time is more than a peculiarity in the static sleeping city. I feel old as I wander these streets, with no purpose, no target in mind. Why should there be a purpose? No hunger and no thirst. I am not tired and I do not feel pain. If so, why should I go anywhere? Why do I feel a need for motion and continuity? Why should my purpose be anything but drifting through this sleeping city? No apparent goal yet might be awake. Could that be my purpose? My reason for being? Even for the slightest exchange of words, a fleeting howl above the wind, a faint whisper that meant nothing. All this would be a merciful respite. Perhaps I will tell them my name. My name? What is my name? Name? Where are you? I shouted, in the hopes that it would return to me if I ask it. Of course, no response arrives. Why should one come from the quiet of the sleeping city? But a voice broke, though. I heard it all before it went silent. I know I did. It asked, "Name? What is my name?" I was thrilled. I was in love. I simply fell for the prospect of another stray on these white and black streets. I wander the pavements and parks to find the voice and regain what the sleeping city took from me. Where are you? I can't see you, I shout, desperately hoping the voice didn't fall. You? I can't see you, the voice shouts back. I am here, I reply so that the voice can find me instead. Here, the voice echoed. Fading echo. Of course, that's all there is in the sleeping city. And in this silence, could my voice be violent? Can it stir more than the reverberation in the air? How can words harm? They cannot, they're words. As forgettable as the time you lie half asleep and forge a momentary empire
to see it all crashing down once sleep leaves you properly.
My voice cannot be violent in this realm anyway, since no one can listen in the sleeping city. Echo is a pure echo. No meaning or purpose. A mute scream against the crashing waves. And so, if that is all I have in this city that took away my name, then I will find a new one. No, that would be pointless. Why bear one when you are the only one? No being may call you by it, use it as a distinction from another mass of flesh. If it would be a matter of choice, you will be the only one who can forget it. Who is the only one? I am the only one, they replied. As such, I ascended as the solitary baptized and baptizer in this sleeping city. I meander about, rejoicing in my newfound name. Realizing before the pointlessness of such possessions, my happiness becomes now bland, a shade of gray neutral to the tonality of emotion. I find myself wanting once more. I enter a humble home to find the residents, yet man differs from the only one in the sleeping city. People lie motionless atop their stone beds, walls within the city. Yet would these enclosures be necessary given that man is sound asleep? No way to escape? I tried to break the illusions of some before, wake them up and see the flesh spark into life. Bodies that have iron claws, hands punctured with lead, rivets that scratch the writings on the beds at times. Cruel and twisted iron bars cover their eyes. Their long, dusky hair spread onto their onyx pillows as drips of aluminum all over it. Their once proud heads morph into galaxies of immortal metal that would put the heavens themselves to shame. Their legs are mangled, covered all over the place with tin copper plates, carefully placed while they were hot on the flesh to ensure the best soldering with the flesh. The feet disappeared entirely, replaced with titan balls, to help them dance among the stars where their beauty belonged. But one thing is necessary before an occurrence of this grandeur, that being the removal of the thick and long nickel rods surrounding the heart. Thus, their majesties, galaxies of metal, rest in the sleeping city. Striding again, the only one through the fortress of dreaming nebulas. I wonder what they dream of, and if I can become beautiful too. Can they meet in their dreams? Do they talk, laugh, cry, and rejoice together? I yearn for this. I must have it. Now I am searching. 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 I have no place to sleep in the sleeping city. I lie down on the concrete and it feels like nothing. It isn't bad nor good, so it must do. A place where I can close my eyes, await my alloys, become one of them, or with them. I will lose my ancient name, forever forgotten as the only one. I will be one of many. I thus admit my defeat before the sleeping city. Welcome to the sleeping city, said a deep voice. No, a high-pitched shout, a hum or a wail, or all at the same time. I meet it now that I open my eyes, only to stare into 1,000 more of the beast. Beneath the deep red eyes, the only spot of color in the black and white city is a gaping mouth, so long and larger than hunger itself, with countless sword-like teeth, stood motionless. This makes its head. The beast has it connected to a fat and coiled body covered in brown fur, supported by 4 plump feet that have long claws stretching onward. But the back of the beast was a spectacle, as there were innumerable tendrils dancing in all the wrong directions, a gray dance that means nothing. You cannot sleep, said the beast with 1,000 voices.
I have guarded the sleeping city, and now I must rest. You must guard before you sleep. I am speechless. I rise, knowing well enough what I must do. I devour the guardian eye by eye, claw by claw, tooth by tooth, tendril by tendril by tendril by tendril. My stomach is now immense, infuriatingly so, as I cannot lick the blood on the ground. I lie on my back. It hurts. It hurts. Nothing was supposed to hurt in the sleeping city. Pain left. Once I was reborn from my hollow carcass, hopping open from the stomach, a sack of flesh becoming my skin and growing fur that smells things. I grew helpful tendrils that help me feel, and a mouth that lets me feast. And in case of the food fights, the claws will always help. What my eyes can see. Only if I try a little, I see them. The pillars of light that are given by the sleepers. They aim for the sky. Why? I do not know. All I care for is that I must guard the sleeping city. I now ingrained my dauntless vigil in my reflex. I devoured tricksters that tried to deceive the sleepers, and sometimes the light would go out. Some woke up. Those who wished they hadn't. After aeons of relentless service, I realized something. The necessity of confirmation? Irrelevant. The warden, I cannot fall even if mortally wounded. Always awake, always alert, always alive. I feel the white grass. I feel the white grass. Someone is desecrating it. I will trample the intruder as I know they are small. I run as windows and tiles tremor with my steps. I see them! They run, but I can pursue. As I chase, cables jump frantically up and down. They are cornered. Afraid, my tendrils say. They fear what comes next. They know what to do. Welcome to the sleeping city. They're out there somewhere. The big fish. Peering into the calm surface water, you might not see them in our midst. Though deep down, swimming and lurking, they wear the face of a common vertebrate, blending easily into the shoal like a bloodthirsty speck of sand in an ignorant bag of flour. As I dragged my dinghy along the white sand toward the edge of the water in the searching, low-hanging sun, it was easy to believe I was in a fever dream. The swallowing, gurgling water that ebbed and flowed at my feet, the welcoming blue void that curved away at the horizon, fishing was like reminiscing with an old friend. It was like a warm kiss on a Sunday afternoon. A greeting beckoned me from somewhere down the beach, a voice that yelled with a slurred mouthful of rotten seaweed. That, or the voice was cracking under smoking 2 packs a day of vocal fry. The man came jogging up to me, which left great boot prints upon wet sand in his wake. As we shook hands, his flesh was slippery and feverish, like brushing the belly of a seeping roadkill. Name's Trevor, finest fisherman along the southeastern coast, if you don't mind myself saying so. His eyes were tight lines under his sage bucket hat. Conqueror of the Floridian Basin's furthest surf cast out here. I flicked him the nervous, tightly pulled line for a smile, the same smile I would have given a hooded passerby. Hi there, I resisted wiping away the gooey slop from his hand out of politeness. Georgia. The falling sun painted the man's face a blotchy, tanned pink. He had a glint in his wrinkled eyes as he said, "Look over there, chap." I followed his finger to the distant skyline over the cliffs. Graphite clouds were beginning to roll in over the horizon like an avalanche of wet boulders. Say, I knew someone like you, Georgia. He cleared his thick throat. Name of Rod, real city boy. The last day I done saw him was a day like any other. We were meant to launch off the ramp together, but see, I was a little late, and so the guy gets restless. He goes out on his own to catch a few. I watched Trevor for a while as his eyes became fixed on the crashing peach waves, watching things that were never there.
The storm came and took him from me, Georgia. Mother Sea dragged him down by his limbs, bubbled his lungs, until his lips drew blue.
He drowned? The man shimmied his bucket hat to the brow with 2 hands.
You bet. And that's my vow after that day, I suppose. If I ever caught a city kid fishing, heading into rough waters, I'd snatch him.
He flicked a thumb over to the metal boat that was floating in the water 100 paces away.
Oh, no, I'm quite okay, I said.
Oh, come now, humor a weathered old man. You can darn bet I'll teach you some things. My boat is a sure thing sturdier than a dinghy.
His lonely old eyes yanked me by the wrist all the way across the beach to his rustic metal vessel that floated on the shallow water. When we boarded, I was immediately greeted by blunt groans and bubbles beneath us I wasn't accustomed to. Before long, we were motoring toward the great red lamp in the sky with nothing but a whisper spoken, all thanks to the boat which whirred and splashed beneath us as we thumped along into the blue nothingness. I was grateful for the quiet, but as I caught the man's face, it was clear he had a growing restlessness I lacked, a yearning for derailing chatter that only came from a finely aged loneliness. When he stopped the boat and dropped the anchor, I knew I was right when he immediately started.
You ever seen a big fish, Georgia?
I gave him an awkward nod. A few, yeah. Never caught one, though. My brother pulled up a sturgeon. Trevor was shaking his head as he untangled his line from his rod.
No, I'm talking about the big fish. The ones that don't have no name.
His hands were passionate and animated as he spoke. He swiftly snapped up a crackling smile before I could laugh.
They're smarter than us, you know, the ones down below.
Oh, so it's even worse. I thought, he's crazy. I should have never got on this boat.
Take these,
he muttered, hurried as he reached into his jacket's many pouches. He slipped a few gelatinous cubes the size of a die into my palm. Most were the color of red-splashed peaches, though some were a deep purple gray, blocky grapes from an ashen willow.
You probably won't believe me yet, Georgia, but you will soon enough.
He cleared his throat. The jelly was sweating in my hand, but perhaps it was my nerves. I was breathing quickly. Something about the guy simply made my skin crawl. What are these? I asked him. He slid one of my hooks through a cube.
Bait for the biggins. Now give her a cast.
I let my line sparkle and soar through the pumpkin-tinged sky before it reached the water with a distant plunk. We sat there for a while, entranced by the sea, but the old man never threw out his line. He was coaching me. At least I should have hoped.
A bite might be coming soon, kid.
He nodded toward the ocean.
Keep a firm grip on it.
I wiped a layer of sweat from my forehead. From my periphery, I saw him extend one wrinkled palm, holding some bait.
Try one. Tastes like sweet heaven.
What? Still clutching my fishing rod, I turned my neck to give him a raised eyebrow and a shake of the head.
What are they made from? It's candy, Georgia. The big fish love the stuff,
Trevor said before throwing a few into his mouth.
Melts like butter.
He ushered me to try the bait, so I reluctantly did. The pieces hit my tongue and slid down my tract. Malderance is to spit in the face of the deranged, and so I chewed them, slowly, bits of revolting snails that rolled down my throat in lumps, almost coming up as chunks. It was disgusting. It stung with the stench of decay. At first it tasted like chicken, as everything does, sorta. But after swallowing it, might as well have become a moldy creme brulee the way it settled.
Bliss, right, kid?
He said after I was done chewing. 2 thumbs up. I was lucky to find peace for a while after that. Just watch the sea and breathe, Georgia. Watch the sea and breathe.
Shame Rod ain't here to see this city kid eat these here jellies. What a way to go, struck by lightning no less. The champion you were, Rodney. Zeus!
He screamed. Without warning, I was running into a jog across the boat following my line. Something was hooked. Something big.
Hey, fish on, kid!
Trevor called. Reeling and pulling and reeling and pulling, I threw my spine forward and then backward, before long, the fish and I were in rhythm, tugging in waves, pulling and leaning in harmonious turns. "Trevor," I huffed. "Pull, release. Pull, release. I thought you told me that Ron drowned." "Whoa, she's a big one, kid. Keep reeling," he boomed, his head hanging overboard. "You see, if you want to catch the big fish, Georgia," he said in my face then, stabbing one lesson-giving finger at me as he spoke each word in short breaths, "you gotta have the special bait. And that, kid, you do." The low sun on the horizon felt warm against my skin, but I couldn't calm my heart, which felt like it was going to pop. "Trevor, you told me that Rod drowned." "Keep reeling, Georgia." My yell cut the sound of the ripples in the water like a hot knife. "Trevor!" There was a silence for a while. Words from me were quiet, unwilling. All that could be heard on the settling boat was my reel spinning and my catch surfacing the water. I hadn't seen what I had fished up. I was too busy staring at Trevor. "What's so special?" My voice faintly trickled from my mouth. "About the bait." He held up a handful of the peach cubes and began talking through rubbery, fishy lips. "Oh, these fine cuts?" His pocket knife sparkled in the hot sun as he absent-mindedly twirled it, his face occupied by old memories. "Take a look." He nodded his head at me to peer at the water. I slowly strode towards the wall of the boat. When touching the edges, I was reluctant to peer over, as if he had asked me to touch a hot stove. My face turned cold as I looked into the blue abyss below. Dozens of pale rocks floated in the deep azure sea, which stretched as far as my eye could see. But as I stared longer, if I squinted enough, I could no longer convince myself that they were stones. They were pale, bloated corpses. Holed. So many cubed holes scattered into their bellies, thousands, all etched into their flesh. "Seems you caught the big fish, kiddo." The voice tickling my neck was rasp, a tongue never made for speech. By the time I turned around, its flesh began to bloom iridescent scales. What remained of Trevor's curly gray hair shed away snowflake clumps of hairy scalp. Clothes that no longer fit around his neck slid easily from his wet mucus-dipped gills. I wanted to scream. In fact, I might have. "No dollary dues could buy me this bait from nobody. For them to hand these over." His bulbous orange eyes met mine before his mouth contorted into a whole wide, toothless grin. "I gotta take 'em out fishing." And so, I am but a warning for future fishermen, for they might not be as lucky as I to dive and swim to shore. They're out there somewhere, the ones you might not see in our midst. The big fish. When you're a child, you're afraid of the dark. More specifically, you're afraid of what is in the dark. Your mind imagines monsters there, grotesque nightmares concocted by your mind. They're everywhere. Under your bed, around a corner, in your closet, just on the other side of your open bedroom door. They are the creak of a board, the groan in the hall. They are the themes which go bump in the night. When you grow up, you realize such things aren't real. We stop seeing shadows in the darkness. Childhood fears of monsters, ghosts, and goblins are replaced with the fear of unemployment, foreclosure, divorce, and depression. Some people say as we age, we grow from child to adult and back to child again. In our golden years, we play board games with new friends and talk on the telephone if we can hear it. We watch game shows and eat dinner early. As our habits revert, sometimes our minds do as well. If you live long enough, you'll see your mind decay like mine has. You forget names or faces. You forget what you went into a room for. But you don't forget a nightmare. Everyone has a childhood nightmare. Some come and go without incident. Some linger. Mine was a lingerer. He stayed around so long I gave him a name. The Grim Grinner.
don't remember the first time I met the Grim Grinner. As far back as I can think, he was always there. He was a tall sort of man, impeccably dressed. He sported a white smoking jacket with pressed black pants, a black waistcoat, and polished Oxfords. His red bow tie was always perfectly matched by his pocket square. He moved in a gangly, deliberate motion, always just in the corner of my eye. I could only see him in full in the dark. Usually he stood at the edge of the doorway to my bedroom. He was always the barrier between my parents and me. But he didn't earn the title Grim Grinner because of his sense of style, no. I bestowed that name upon him because of his toothy expression. His face stood out, you see, not because of his slicked black hair or his pale blue eyes. No. It stood out because of his smile. He always smiled, from ear to ear. I mean that quite literally. His mouth was human, of course, but extraordinary in its horrible fascination. The corners of his lips were split, all the way past his cheekbones to where the ears met the face. The mouth was overly massive and resembled something more like a shark than a man. His smile showed 88 teeth, serrated and neatly fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. I know, I counted them, many times, in fact, as a child. He would stand there all night with a perpetual grin. Just before the first rays of light from the sun could break the horizon, he would remove a cigarette from a golden case and place it against his lips. He then fetched a golden lighter to match from his pocket and opened it. With a flick, he ignited the flame and dissolved with the dawn. Only the faintest smell of tobacco smoke remained in the air. My father smoked, so I assume he never noticed. I felt like he wouldn't notice. He worked very long hours and was always tired when he returned home. He rarely had time to spend with me. I don't hold it against him. He worked very hard to support the family. My mother was never home either. She worked at the barbecue restaurant on Quebec Drive. I was what was known back in the day as a latchkey kid. I didn't mind, but I was alone often. I was an only child, and I dared not go outside to play late at night when no one knew where I'd be. The last time I saw the Grim Grinner, I was 9. He had stood there in the doorway with that smile plastered on his face. He wouldn't dare enter my room, not while my nightlight burned strong. I told myself that every night. Occasionally, he would turn and take a stroll down the hallway to my parents' room. He did that often, but he would always return to my door and stand. And grin. It was late, or very early. I suppose they're often the same. That night, the Grim Grinner stood in my door as I shook in my bedclothes. He turned and looked over his shoulder to my parents' room. And when he looked back at me, the grin was gone. It was the only time his expression ever changed. He looked sad, almost mournful. He removed his golden cigarette case from his breast pocket and gently fingered the hand-rolled smokes until he found the one he wanted. He picked it up with his long, spindly digits and closed the lid to his case. He tapped the cigarette against the case 3 times and then placed it into his mouth. He removed the lighter and ignited it. He held the flame close and lit the cigarette. It formed a soft cherry on the end, and the Grim Grinner took a long drag. He blew smoke from his nostrils and gave me the slightest of nods. He vanished in the smoke. When my father awoke the next morning, my mother had passed. Lung cancer, the doctors had told him. My mother had chosen to hide it from me, he said, that I was too young to understand. My father never smoked again until the day he died. When I had my first bout of severe forgetfulness, I didn't tell my daughters. How could I? I couldn't remember their names to call them. In that moment, I knew I was home, but I didn't know where home was. I had sat down to watch television, and suddenly, my mind got away from me. It lasted just a few minutes, and then I was myself again. But in those few minutes, I think I was my childhood self again. I couldn't remember what I did when I had my lapse in memory. I knew he had been there, though. I smelt the tobacco burn. The next time he came to see me, I was about to go to bed. He stood in the kitchen behind me as I laid on the couch. I felt him before I saw him. He just stood there, with that grin plastered on his face. There were no lights on. He took a step towards me, and then another. I backed away from him into my office and turned on the small desk lamp inside. He stood in the doorway of my office while I sketched him. I stood watch for the entire night as he stared at me. His expression never changed. When the dawn came, I had forgotten he was there. But my sketch reminded me. I saw the very doorframe in my drawing which I looked at now. I knew he had returned. I wondered why he came back to me. I never fully understood why he left. I assumed it was because my fear of the dark was replaced with the existential dread of mortality and death. Did I lose my childhood innocence when my mother died? Perhaps I did. But now, I am alone. My father has been dead for 40 years. My children are grown and live elsewhere. My eldest daughter has 2 children of her own, and a wonderful husband who cares for her. My youngest daughter is hard at work, only a month away from the completion of her medical degree from Duke University. I'm proud of them both, and they call me to tell me they love me. They want to keep me safe. But with the pandemic, I haven't seen them in person for over a year. I am truly alone. I am alone, and my mind has begun to fail me in my age. I suppose I feel as alone as I did as a child. Perhaps that is why the Grim Grinner has returned. He's here now, even as I type these words to you. I can smell the faint scent of tobacco smoke as it clings to his white smoking jacket. I hear the soft click of the wooden soles of his Oxfords against the hardwood floors of my kitchen. I know many more years have passed in my life than lie before me. As an old woman, far away from her children and grandchildren, I often think back to my childhood. Part of me has always wondered what would happen if my nightlight went out. I haven't turned my office light on yet. I'm not sure if I want to. After 79 years apart, he came back for me. When you live to be my age, you just become tired. I'm too old to stay up all night. After 88 years on this earth, I want to know the answer to the biggest question from my childhood. I want to know the answer before it's too late for me to know. What happens when the Grim Grinner comes for you?
In any other situation, the sound of rain in the woods would have been relaxing. However, due to the circumstances, it just made my stress skyrocket. My teeth chattered and I hugged my chest, trying to keep any lingering body heat close. I had foolishly gone off trail and got caught up in a late spring rain shower. The temperature had plunged, silencing the annoying bugs, and also ensuring that my clothes would remain wet and uncomfortably cold for a long time. I was hopelessly lost. I had no idea if I was heading towards the hiking trail or away from it. I hadn't deviated from a straight line, nor had I disoriented myself, and when the rain started falling, I turned around and started walking back. My gaze alternated between looking down at the earth and looking up, hoping to see an open space of the hiking trail ahead. I looked up one last time and my heart soared. Up ahead, I could make out a break in the trees where there seemed to be a gap. That must be the hiking trail. Carefully, I moved quickly, motivated by the sight. However, my heart sank when I finally broke free of the woods. Instead of a trail made of trampled dirt, I stood at the edge of the road that went on for miles, covered in tall grass. I crouched down to examine the road, and through the tall blades of grass, gravel peeked out. This hadn't been used in a long time. I stood back up, momentarily disappointed, but then I realized something. Even though this road hasn't seen traffic in ages, this had to lead back to civilization. But which way should I go? Well, I'd walk to the left, and if I didn't find anything, I'd turn around and go the other way. It was thanks to the glimmer of hope that made me take off in a brisk run. At the end of the road, I was greeted by the sight of a large, abandoned house. I should have turned back around once the road entered the woods, but I figured this was a shorter and easier path through the woods that'd lead to somewhere else. Instead, this was the final destination. For a moment, I was tempted to turn around and head in the opposite direction, but a sudden breeze told me that first, I should probably take shelter and see if I could get warm. I approached the house and stopped, admiring it. It was incredibly old, but still stubbornly standing against time and the forces of Mother Nature. It was a bit odd, though. You'd think the front of the house would be facing the road head-on. Instead, it was the backside of the house that faced the road. I paused, and the corners of my mouth twitched. What came to mind when looking at the house was the picture of that tiny kitten with its back to the camera that had the captions of, "No talk, me angry." What came to mind when looking at the house was that picture of that tiny kitten with its back to the camera. It had the captions of, "No talk, me angry." Off to the side, there was an old cellar, its doors wrenched open. I definitely did not want to take shelter in that place, which was no doubt a dark and damp and musty place. In front of me was an entrance with no door. This led me into a dusty old kitchen. I could almost imagine a woman dressed in 1950s clothing standing at the kitchen sink, wistfully staring at the road while she scrubbed dirty dishes, wishing she could do more with her life. I blinked. The image had felt so real. So real, I could almost smell the dish soap she was using. A bit freaked out, I shuffled further in, wanting to get away from the cold air that followed me in. I frowned at the sight of the trash in the hallways. Old magazines, cigarette butts, broken beer bottles, and other garbage that I did not want to think about littered and rotting floorboards. The walls were cracked, and stubborn kudzu crawled up the sides. The sight of the invasive plant made me wince. No doubt in the future, the entire house would be smothered in kudzu. Poor thing, I muttered out loud, feeling sympathy for the house. A quick walkthrough of the first floor revealed to me that nowhere in the house was a good spot to warm up, and I didn't want to go upstairs because of the giant hole in the staircase. I wasn't athletic enough to jump over it. Thankfully, there was a space behind the staircase that provided some shelter from the cold air. All the windows were broken, and the front door was missing. It was better than nothing, I thought. Ugh, I groaned, burying my head in my hands. I'm so stupid. I knew better than to walk into the woods without my phone or backpack. Past me had decided it'll be a quick walk. I won't go too far. I sat idle, occasionally squeezing my shirt to try and get any remaining water out. I even took my shirt off, but the chill in the air made me put it back on. While my clothes were damp, they still at least provided some protection. At one point, I started to doze off. First, I kept waking myself up, wanting to be alert, just in case someone ventured into the house, but then I allowed some sleep to overcome me. It'll do me some good, I thought. I need to rest. Something made my eyes fly open. I stared at the ceiling above me, trying to remember where I was. Oh yeah, I got lost and found an abandoned house. Why did I wake up? It didn't seem like much time had passed since I nodded off. I closed my eyes again. And then they opened. what had woken me up was the sound of a kettle starting to whistle. I sat up and realized I was no longer in an abandoned house. The trash was gone, no plants climbed the walls, and I realized I could smell pastries. When I got up, I saw that the front door was there. For a moment, I thought I had gone back in time, but the chill of the rain still lingered in the air. I cautiously followed the whistling kettle to the kitchen and was greeted by the sight of what looked to be a one-person tea party. Charming cupcakes and small pastries settled on a table that was previously not there, and a china teacup sitting in a fancy saucer sat in front of an empty chair. The whistling kettle was getting to me, so I took it off the stove. "What are you doing here?" a woman sharply said from behind me, nearly causing me to drop the kettle. I spun around to face the woman, and this time, I did drop it. Rather than a normal woman, a woman with a skeletal face stood there, arms crossed. She wore a white beach dress, wore white sandals over bloodied feet, and had long, inky black hair cascading down her back. Empty sockets stared at me, and she sounded annoyed, like I was a cat who had wandered in. All I could do was stammer. The woman lifted a hand and twirled her finger. The fallen kettle floated into the air and poured itself into the teacup. However, that was it. Hot water pooled into the teacup, and the kettle floated in the air, and behind me, the stove turned itself off. This time, the woman seemed to scratch the air. The teacup flew from a cupboard and landed on the other side of the table, and a chair appeared from thin air. "I only have hot water," she said, and the kettle poured hot water into the new teacup. "I don't like tea nor coffee. Stains my teeth." She cackled loudly, sounding like a cartoonish witch. "Come, sit down! You found yourself here, so I might as well treat you like a guest." In 2 steps, she entered the kitchen and sat down at the table, gesturing for me to join her. After a moment of hesitation, I joined her. "Eat as much as you like," she said, taking a sip of the hot water. I nervously picked up a cupcake and took a small bite out of it. It was incredibly sweet and made me chase away the taste with a deep sip of the hot water, which made me warm. I'm sorry I trespassed into your house," I said. "I got lost in the woods and found my way here." "It's not my house," the woman said, placing the teacup into the saucer with a tiny click. "Are you trespassing too?" I joked, instantly hating myself. "I suppose so," she shrugged. "I've been wandering for several decades and so happened to find the house a few months ago. It's got plenty of trauma that allows me to manipulate it. Shame, though. It was a beauty in its prime." What happened?" I asked. "I'm not exactly sure." She thoughtfully turned her teacup. "Something happened to the family. Something really bad." She glanced up. "Their fear is etched into these walls. Sometimes I'll hear tidbits of their final day here. Screaming and yelling. That's not the only thing, though. Violent things have happened in the place, even after the family fled." "Oh," was all I could say. I wasn't sure how to respond. The skull woman didn't eat any of the pastries, so she encouraged me to eat as much as I like. She even offered to wrap up some for me to take home. "Yes, the road leads to a highway," she was saying after I'd eaten my fill. "I'm sure someone could stop and help you." "How long is the road?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted, letting out another cackle. "When you're a witch, distance doesn't matter." "Are we in a different version of the house?" I was really curious about that, so I had to ask it. "I suppose you could call it that." The woman sounded absolutely delighted to talk more about the house. "I took what the house used to look like and made it my own. It's kind of like when you apply new paint to old walls. No, that's not right. Wow, this is hard to explain." She pressed her fingertips together and rested her elbows against the table. It's identical to what the house used to look like, but it's in its own bubble. Only I can pass through both. Not sure how you ended up here, though.
I told you, I fell asleep and woke up here, I reminded her.
Still, it's very odd, she murmured. Anyways, would you like to see the house, young lady?
Sure,
I said, pushing my chair back and stood up. The woman did so too. She led me around the first floor of the house. Seeing how beautiful the house had once been made my heart break. What could have caused a family to suddenly abandon such a place? I found myself glancing at the walls, half expecting to find the answer there. At the bottom of the stairs, the woman pointed. Sometimes I can hear what sounds like someone tumbling down the stairs, she said. And if someone had fallen, the second floor is where I mostly hear echoes of the past. Come. Her skirt rippled as she walked up the stairs, her sandals making dull thuds. My eyes were drawn to her heels. They were bloody, but it seemed to be old blood. What a mysterious woman. The first time I entered the master bedroom, I heard a woman screaming and a child crying, she informed me, leading me into the room. Just about gave me heart failure, it startled me that much. A queen-sized bed was in the middle of the room, and I could see an old-fashioned crib in the corner, with wooden toys scattered around. She then led me to a boy's bedroom. No echoes here, but I will hear something banging on the door. You should do a haunted house tour, I said, following her into the hallway. You'd get rich real quick. I'll think about it, she cackled. The hallway is active every now and then, but I don't think that's related to the original owners of this house. Now, the really creepy thing is in the girl's bedroom. Come. She urged me to move quicker, and we stepped into the bedroom. With a simple gesture of her arms, sound started playing, like she had pressed play on an audio recorder. Mama, Papa, help me! A teenage girl was screaming. Please, open the door, Mama, Papa! Loud knocking filled the air, making it sound like multiple people were hitting on the walls. Just as quickly as the sound started, they ended. Just what happened here? I wondered out loud, rubbing away the goosebumps that formed on my arms. The girl's voice was filled with fear and despair and desperation, and I could almost picture her repeatedly hitting the door, begging her parents. I don't know. The woman shook her head. I believe they managed to get away safely. She hesitated for a moment. At least, physically, they did. I have no doubt part of them will always be here, trapped in a never-ending loop of that day. Quietly, she added in, I think it's time you ought to leave. It'd be a shame if you got trapped here, too. I nodded. That sounded like a good idea.
Humans have always loved to tell a good, scary story. Everyone likes to hear a monster story. Campfire ghost stories, creepypastas, horror novels. The monsters, the villains, are able to be understood by the human mind. They may be corporeal, but they're able to be understood by the human mind. If only the real monsters were so easy to understand. If only they were so easy to fight off, to see, to hear. You see, the real monsters of the world are those humanity has always ignored. The ones that they rationalize away, because their minds can't even quite see them. But I've seen them. I know what they are. I know how they hunt and torment humanity. Thousands of realities exist, separated by curtains.
Yes, I know, it may be shocking to think that there are many universes like ours, but that's not important. What's important is that curtain. People feel the shifts in these curtains, feel their ebbs and flows. When you think you see something out of the corner of your eye, but there's nothing when you look, that's the curtains shifting. Maybe something was there for just a moment, but it's gone back through the curtain, back into the curtain itself. This is the home of the beasts, the true monsters in the world, the only ones excluding what humanity can truly be. They thrive in the threads of the curtains between worlds, between realities and truths. They swim through these curtains, these thin veils of what is comprehensive to the minds of this world. I'm sure you must be thinking it. Everyone does. How can the monsters hurt us if they're in the curtains? This, dear reader, is where the monsters stop being just creatures and really become just that, monsters. You see, these creatures relish in seeing the panic, the confusion, and the paranoia that the movement of these curtains cause in our species. They've become addicted to it. Their movements don't cause enough ripples in reality anymore. Humans don't notice as much anymore. Not now that they're always focused on things close to their faces. So, they resorted to the only thing they could. They came out of the curtains. Now, they aren't always out. You see, the curtains aren't everywhere. They only come close enough to our world for the monsters to exist in certain spots. They're close enough to move the curtains everywhere, but there's only some places where the area is thin enough for things to exit. The biggest problem in finding where the places are is that the monsters all behave differently. They all have different tells, different ways that they behave, that they get what they want. Some monsters drive people to insanity, torturing their minds by forcing them to look at something their minds can hardly comprehend. Others stay just out of sight, letting the sounds that push beyond human understanding and the paranoia consume them until they finally get bored and end it. Many, however, just torture their prey physically until death. They all have different attributes, too. Some look like fires, some look like break-ins gone wrong, some look like a serial killer that is almost an impossible timeline, and some look like someone just cracked and went insane. Are you seeing how difficult they make it for me? Me, who has to find them and destroy them so that they can't come through the curtain? Who has to personally make sure that the spot of the curtain is blocked or watched? I've only seen them myself one time, and it was borderline insanity for me. For a good long while, I thought I'd cracked, but I didn't. I made it, and I came out of it knowing things that were impossible for me to have known. I'm sure you wondered why I know so much about these monsters that are supposed to be inconceivable to us of humanity, how I know where they live, how they hunt, why they hunt. It's because when I saw my monster, a part of it never left me. I saw my monster when I was only 16 years old. I had gone out with friends to an old cabin in the woods that was supposed to be haunted. People had died there, they said. It would be fascinating and a thrill. Oh, that place was broken, all right. It was haunted by something, but it wasn't a ghost. It was them. Those things and those curtains. All I remember is a huge form coming from what seemed to be a wall. It was a color like black, but too shifting. It had 4 somethings. You couldn't call them limbs. Couldn't even tell how to describe them. It was a slick thing, like liquid if it was able to avoid gravity and stay in a shape. The smell was like burnt hair and decay. It had teeth, but I couldn't tell you in what arrangement or shape. And that's the last thing I remember of them. I'm told that when the police finally came, on the request of a terrified family nearby, I was curled on the ground, shrieking and covered in my own blood. My friends were dead, and I would only say, "It came, it killed, it got the thrill. Over and over and over again. I went to the hospital. It took me years to regain sanity. I remember nothing of the event. But I do know one thing. The doctor said there was something massive in my brain. However, they couldn't remove it without killing me, and as far as they could tell, it wasn't causing me any harm. They said, with unease, that it looked like a tooth. I don't know why this gave me the ability to comprehend them, but it did. I can hear their sound and stand it. I can feel the curtains when I arrive in those thinner places. I have dedicated this ability to help kill them, force them in, close them out of our world. I can't explain how to kill them, I just know. There's no way to prepare. It depends on the monster. Why am I telling you this? Why would I tell you something that you can't change or even really understand? Because I fear one thing. I fear that this thing in my head is making me one of them. Their sounds have begun to sound like a language for me, words I can understand. I feel joy when I scare people on accident. I feel the pull to join the void when I'm near the curtains. I feel the want to torture, to kill, to destroy. I tell you this, all of this, so that some brave soul can try to fight them when I'm gone. I tell you this because I might become one of them. Because I may need to be the monster someone kills. My name is Alexa Bennett, and I'm the girl who hunts monsters. My name is Alexa Bennett, and I'm the girl becoming the monsters. My name is Alexa Bennett, and someone needs to take up my mantle. My name is Alexa Bennett, and I am coming for you, humanity.